Hello and welcome everyone. Welcome to Freedom from Trauma, an online series where we're interviewing teachers and experts to bring you powerful conversations as well as profound practices that help heal trauma so you can create the body, mind, spirit you truly desire. Today, it's my absolute honor to introduce our guest, and her name is Chameli Ardagh. She is the founder of Awakening Women, and she is the wisdom keeper of this wonderful community of fierce, feminine, and gentle women. So, welcome so much here, and thank you for being here, Chameli. Thank you.
Thank you.
Such an
Thank you for having me.
honor. So, when I have been part of some of your experiences and been a witness to the powerful transformation that I have experienced as well as watched in the group. I just had to have you be part of this because although we talk in a lot of story sometimes and mythology, I have found that those mythologies have such a clear and powerful map, though even though not immediately, but when we go on those journeys, I personally have had these huge breakthroughs. So wanted to just hear from you about a little bit more about how does that happen?
Mm, yeah. So I am a student of the goddess path, and the goddess path can be traced back all the way to the beginning of human life here on planet and beyond. It's not only human, I think. And the kind of premise or the basic worldview of the goddess path is wholeness. So many of us have learned about spirituality or religion in a sense of, you know, it's very emphasis on the male gods. And in the West, we have the male god that is very judgmental, um, which creates this kind of division between the spiritual and the mundane, or spiritual and matter, as if our freedom, our spiritual maturity is found outside the body and outside of earth. So the goddess view just bring back into balance and into remembering our intrinsic wholeness, and how that is relevant in our healing journey. And for those of us supporting people in the healing journey, is that it reminds us of the basic view that the person, no matter how wounded or interrupted that person is intrinsically whole. So there are just certain patterns of reactivity that kind of keeps us in a loop, keeps us in a kind of predictable strategy that can be a result of trauma. But nevertheless, energy takes this form, and the same energy can take a benevolent and useful form. It's the same energy. Our being is wholeness. So when we work with people and when we go into a healing journey, how that changes it, our process fundamentally is that I have, over time of working with thousands and thousands of people, I have come to a fundamental trust in the healing capacity of human. 100% trust. So when I'm holding space for a human going through her or his healing journey, my job is to relate to that wholeness in that person so that that is brought into awareness and experience of that person. And from there, that wholeness will do the healing work. Our job is just to create that safe space for that intelligence to have its momentum. Now, because we live in a modern society where we have forgotten that intrinsic wholeness, luckily there are these maps, these signposts, these trails of breadcrumbs laid out for us from our ancestors. I believe that these, in the form of mythology, and I believe that these stories and patterns that the stories are following are the same patterns we find in all of nature. It's the patterns that informs this whale song, that the whale is navigating from one side of the globe to another. These are frequencies that has been here since the beginning of time. So even a whale that is born here will know this song and know its way back to where it needs to mate or make, give birth. And these song lines, or these vibrations, these patterns, these pathways are interpreted through the human, through these stories and songs, art and dances, even through, we can even find it in recipes that is passed on from woman to woman, or handicraft, embroidery, patterns like that.
Baskets and weaving and.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So what my experience is that whenever I tell a myth, a story, even though it is maybe feels a little different or new for a person, it is as if the cells in our bodies remember. It's a resonance in the DNA. And that's why it is so powerful, because healing happens in the sense that we begin to feel ourselves as part of a bigger momentum. Even this personal experience of perhaps trauma that feels so intimate, and so we oftentimes carry personal shame around our experience. And to place ourselves in the greater story is not to bypass the personal, it's just to see it in the bigger context, which can be very, very helpful. We begin to see that, oh, this is a universal battle that I'm fighting, or that I'm part of a healing journey. And there are signposts for me. There are people who have gone here before and have left me hints.
Yeah, I think that is such a empowering sense of knowing that you're not alone, because one of the greatest breakdowns that happens in trauma, to a person, is that they think they're alone and they're isolate. Then they isolate, and then that makes it even more hard to come out of. And so, with these maps and with these metaphors, to find a place to ride that wave, of a healing journey. How did you come into this work? Let's just go back a little into your story, just a little, so audience can know a little bit more about you.
Yes. So I grew up in Norway, and I came out of a family situation in childhood that was full of trauma. And I moved into my teenage year trying to find strategies to not feel pain. I felt extreme pain. So in my late teenage years, I found spirituality. And for me, that was somehow a tempting escape route. Like, I saw spirituality as a way out of here, away from the pain. And that was extremely attractive to me. There was a lot of maps that I follow from East that told me that if I only meditated enough and I did enough practice, I would transcend this body experience. And these paths, they led me to a realization that, oh, the pain and the story and me and the body and the pain in the body, all of this was not, it was part of my experience, but it was not my only, it was not defining who I am. That I was awakening to a dimension of myself, my own awareness, my own presence, that was unharmed, that was that is peaceful, that is universally loving. And it was a great freedom in that awakening. But from there, I could have that peace and compassion and love in my meditation with my closed eyes. But the moment I opened my eyes and started to relate and speak, it felt as if there were old patterns just taking over again, especially in relationship. I saw myself just being in this fight and flight and kind of reenacting the relationship patterns from my parents. And I felt trapped in it. I did not know how to bridge the inner realization with how I lived my life. And for me, that was a painful split, a schism.
Yeah.
And I realized that, oh, you know what? My longing is not to get out of here. My longing is to get more here. I want to be in life. I want to be alive in my body, in life, so that I can be a vehicle for awakening consciousness here on earth, here and now. And that was the start of a whole different process and practice, which has to do with integration. It has to do with embodiment. And there is where you have to then I had to get, down and dirty and begin a healing journey that I don't think has any end. I'm still in it.
I resonate and relate to what you just described. And the key word, which I'm so happy you used, because it really strikes me also, is integration. Because I see it so much in so many different ways in communities and society, is that we go all out with this one aspect of life or beingness, and then everything else is bypassed, and then there's this other part we're driving towards, and then everything else falls apart. And this idea that we are one whole being, where we don't make it wrong for being hurt or betrayed or abused or neglected or even the worst things possible, and we find ourselves in this place or predicament, which is what the audience and the viewers are watching this to see. How can we integrate and be, so thank you for saying that. I feel like that's my theme for the year itself, was integration, because I've seen this and that, but how can I integrate my physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, and how can we be whole again? Because we were whole once upon a time, and then we lost our way.
And you're still whole. You're still whole, but there are some, fixed patterns that has been created that can feel that we are stuck in separation. But the wholeness is never split.
You said do the hard work. So when you said that, can you like go into that? What does that look like?
It is to see that, no matter how successful we are in creating a functional personality of light and of strength and of beauty, if it is split off from parts of ourselves, if parts of ourselves are living in exile, in the shadow, and we use a lot of our energy, life force energy, it costs. We pay a high price to push things away. It costs in our life force. Yeah, it takes a lot of energy to push away. So no matter how successful this is, it will never satisfy the thirst of the soul, because the soul longs for union, longs for that wholeness. So the hard work is to see that you begin to see the plastic, you feel the plastic taste of that kind of light, the light that rejects the dark. And then either life kicks you off the pedestal of the throne, or you choose to embark on that journey, because you can sniff the medicine of the real. You can feel that there's something else waiting for you. and you go down and you begin to call these exiled parts home. And that can be a humbling experience. Yeah, like for me, I meet these places again and again, and here I am, a spiritual teacher. I've been practicing for 30 years in sadhana, very intense sadhana. So it can be quite humbling to sort of, what? Like another piece I've been blind to, another piece of of contracted, coagulated energy that just keeps interfering with my relationships that I didn't even know. But the beauty, it's hard work, it's humiliating right there, it's painful, there's a lot of confusion. But the beauty of it is that once we begin to face these blind spots and bring them back into wholeness, it's food for the wholeness. So the result is just much more
Expansion.
presence, yeah, just more life force. So it's just such a reward. And this journey, if I may tell a story. Yes, that illustrates.
I have my mug and
yes, exactly. So one wonderful story that is a map of this kind of journey is the story of Inanna. And Inanna is a Sumerian goddess, and that is the area that is today called Iraq. And it's one of the story was actually written down. So it is one of the oldest poems we have written down in the world, and still, it's still preserved. We can still read it. It took a long time before they could decode the language. They found out that the language is a woman's language. So actually it was a priestess knowing how to write who was writing down this poem. We're talking about, this culture was like 4,000, 5,000 years before Christ. And so 6, 7, even 8,000 years ago. And the story is about Inanna, and she's called the Queen of the Heavens. So it means that she's a very spacious goddess. She's I think she's the Venus in the planets. Her father is the other planets. Her grandfather's other planets. So she lives in a very spacious reality where also these planets are moving in a very predictable patterns. So it's the kind of that state of consciousness that is very rational, predictable, emphasis on the light of the kind of analysis of things. It's that kind of and these are the sky gods, and she's the daughter of the sky gods. And I think most of us can call ourselves children of the sky gods in the culture today. We have learned to value the sky gods a lot. Like that's what is, we call a more advanced, for example. So she's successful in this world, but then something in her, the evolutionary impulse in her, like there's an investment from evolution itself that wants us to grow, that wants us to become. So it's that same power that is within the seed. Yeah, it presses itself, it cracks open from the seed, it presses itself up from through the soil, through the darkness, into the unknown. What is that within that just wants to become? Yeah, it's a desire to become, and it has a tremendous power in it, and that is what we are made of too. So we can actually tap into that wants to become. So that is also moving in Anna, and she gets engaged with the earth man, who she makes her king. So she marries, and that's where she goes into very human like dramas. Like it's like she's full of lust and desire and jealousy, and she gets all messy into the earthly realm. So already there she is initiated into another aspect. One can say that, oh, she's losing her light or her grace, but there's something in her that needs to go through that mess. And so now she's called the queen of the heavens and queen of the earth.
Yeah.
But there's even more that calls her. And she begins to hear the call from the underground, the underworld. And she has a sister in the underworld wailing in pain. And Inanna, she decides to go and visit her dark sister. And she puts on all her regalia, her queen, robe and crown, and she tells her priestess, Ninshubur, she says, you stay here on the surface of the earth and keep guard. You beat the drum for me. And if 3 days has gone past and I haven't returned, then something has gone wrong. So you have to then mobilize help and come and get me. And Ninshubur, she decides, she agrees on that. Ninshubur remember that every part of the myth is you. So Ninshubur is also part of our own consciousness. In a relationship with a coach or a therapist, that person can actually hold the space of Ninshubur for you when you go down into the dark where you can't see that clearly. But the promise of a healing process is that Ninshubur then becomes integrated within yourself, where you begin to see that, oh, this therapist or coach or teacher is actually mirroring to me an aspect of my own consciousness that stays alert and awake even when I go down into very difficult, dark areas of my psyche. So she goes out into her journey, and she begins her long, long journey down into the underworld. She walks and she walks, and then she comes to a gate. And this is first of 7 gates. And here at this gate, there are guards. Erishkagel, her dark sister, has heard that that Inanna is on her way. And Erishkagel is not pleased. She's very angry. She doesn't understand what Inanna wants. She thinks it's a flippant kind of idea that, like, oh my God, you think you can just kind of visit the underworld and then return again like a tourist? Like, that's not how it works. Like, this will kill you if you go down. And she sends out the guards to stop Inanna. But the guards say, okay, you can enter this gate if you sacrifice something. And Inanna, she removes her crown, and she lays the crown down at the gate. And this is the crown that identifies her as a goddess. She lays it down, and then she's allowed to enter. She walks and walks. It's dark, it's damp, it's frightening, and she comes to the second gate. The guards are there asking her to sacrifice. And through each gate, she has to sacrifice everything that has identified her as something that was actually successful for her. So this is an example of her voluntarily going into this journey that some of us do in our spiritual practice. But very often, it's life kicking us into the journey. Like, it's not voluntarily at all. Yeah, like when the identity we have been used to cracks, the divorce comes, or we lose our youth, or we lose our mobility, or we lose, there's many ways that the identity we are used to just cracks, and we are catapulted into this kind of initiation. So everything that has identified her, she has to sacrifice. And until she comes to the 7th gate, she goes through, and at this point she's naked, she's bowed to the ground, she is completely surrendered. And then she stands face to face with her dark sister. And the dark sister is not applauding her or celebrating her. She's still pissed, and she's still so in pain. So she puts the evil eye into Inanna, because Inanna thinks like, oh no, I have sacrificed everything. But she still has this self that wants to prove herself. She has this self that sacrifice. And that's what Ereshkigal is the last one. She put the evil eye into her and she dies. And this is how the queen of the heaven and earth ends up as this corpse. And if that is not enough, Ereshkigal, the dark sister, tells the guard to hang out this beautiful goddess body onto a meat hook where the body hangs and rots. So that is where the story leads us. And for 3 days, the corpse is hanging and rotting. And if you have any knowledge of Christian stories, you will see that this is a much earlier story than when Christ was hanging on the cross for 3 days, or was under, in the tomb for 3 days before he resurrected. We see that story actually in many older myths. It's a very archetypal story of initiation through crisis, through wounding. So 3 days has gone. Ninshubur on the surface realized that something has gone wrong. And she rushes to the sky gods for help, which is an interesting point. Where do we go for help? Where do we think, who do we think can help us when we really need it? Inanna actually told her to go to the sky gods because Inanna idolizes them. She thinks that they are the wisest one. But what happened when Ninshubur go and ask for help? They meet it with a rational mind. They go like, what? Did she go down to the underworld? Well, then she can't return. That's the law. Well, help herself. Like, this is, she has to take consequences for her choices. They're very kind of rational about it until she comes to, it's actually, I think it's Inanna's brother, who is the water god of the rivers and the waters and emotions. And he brings a very kind of creative approach. He kind of get curious. It's like, oh, how can we flow with this? What's possible? Like he had, again, it's an aspect of our own consciousness. Mm. And then he sends out 2 little beings that can slip through the gates, and they can easily, invisibly come down to the underworld. And these beings are called the mourners. And this is an interesting point, also reflection in our healing journey, because when they come down, they find Ereshkigal howling on the floor in the underground. She's in such a deep pain. And it is as if the light of Inanna has amplified her pain. And it's almost like she's birthing. It's actually in the poem, it's almost described as birthing pains. And she howls. And now what the mourners do, they don't give her advice. They don't try to help her. What they do is that they just echo back what she says. So they are mirroring to her. Oh, she says, oh, my pain. And they go, oh, yes, queen, your pain. And she goes, oh, my inner, yes, your inner. And in this back and forth echo, but she's just mirrored and received in this way, her heart begins to soften and she heals. She comes back to herself. And she's so full of gratitude that she says, what can I give you and offer you in return? You have saved me. And they say, all we want is Inanna back. We need the queen, the goddess back. And Ereshkigal put the eye of life, gaze of life onto Inanna, and she returns to life. And then very quickly, she rushes up to the surface. On her way, she gets back all her gear, all her identity. But nothing is the same. She has seen herself without these identities. She has seen herself naked. She has seen her naked being, and it can never be unseen. So yes, she has her crown back, but her life energy is not all used by clinging to this crown as if it is herself. She knows herself without the crown. Just like when we are in a loss or a healing journey, with the right framework, with the right understanding, with the right support, we can go through that crumbling when it's, because this is very scary, because who are we without all of these identities that we are used to? Who are we? But that is also where there's a yogic portal. There's a spiritual portal right there, where we are initiated into a sense of self that, yes, can play with these different roles and masks that we use in life, but we know who we are other than that, deeper than that. So she comes up to the surface less naive. She's an initiated woman. She's the one who has seen the dark and survived. And that is women where we, like you, we feel trust. Like these are women we can lean into, where we, our being relaxes around women like that. And it's the opposite that many of us think. We think we have to be perfect and light and, to be a resource for others. But that's, scary for those of us who have been, thrown into the underworld. We want support and sisterhood and brotherhood that has an understanding of these processes, not only as a mistake, not only as when I say mistake or not, it's not like, for example, an abuse. We would never say that was meant to be, or that, those are like very superficial labels we can, or silver linings we try to, escape out of it. But there's a way to hold it, the isness of it, like the isness of our experiences as what we got to work with, as our medicine. Like for me, I remember I spent a lot of time in therapy, and the kind of predicament for our healing project was that, I had experienced this and it was a mistake, and I had to do therapy in order to become whole. And then when I got initiated into the path, more mystical path, the yogini path, I realized that some of these traumatic experiences I had was initiations. That doesn't undermine that for the girl I was at that time, this was traumatic, and I would do anything to protect that girl.
Right.
But it happened, and where it has led me, I see it in a different way. It's beyond good or bad or positive. Oh, it was positive, because abuse is never positive, but it is. And what we do out of that isness is where this map is also showing us how it can be an initiation.
That was delicious. Women and men, children that are raised with conditioning and ideologies of who to be, how to be, and then society, our education, teachers, systems in the world that inform us of our identity, and then we see that as the bar to aspire, and we go for that, right? So many of us, even I've done that. And then when, like Inanna, she chooses to come down and then go even further down, because she's driven by that that wanting to reach her sister, first to experience the earthly dimensions and then go even deeper. And for somebody who's not had the framework or perspective of this kind of looking at it this way, when they're in it now, and to see the reframe that you just presented. I know you do a lot around um, embodiment also of these experiences of awakening. Can you speak a little about how somebody who's in the depth of despair, in the dark deep, uh, actually find that little glimpse, that little ray of hope to create a shift, a movement in them towards awakening?
Yeah. So the coming back to what we spoke about in the beginning is that we are intrinsically whole. We are made of consciousness. We are made of the same consciousness that creates all things. So when we are in a dark despair, we are in places where we don't see much of the light of possibilities. The way that we work is that and which is also very common in trauma healing work, is that we emphasize, we focus on how to access resource, and that is very specific and just very tangible in the sense that we bring our hands to the body, yeah, and you can feel the touch, just to come back to a simplicity like that. We practice with conscious breathing. These are all yogic techniques that also trauma healing and trauma therapy has recognized, because it is regulating the vagus nerve, it is regulating the nervous system in the way that we access resources. And that is our work, because once we are in resource and with willingness, the healing work begins to happen. Some of us emphasize too much of the darkness. Yeah, we think that, oh, it's only through pain and darkness that I will grow. I used to be very much like that. It's like, bring it on. It has to be painful. It has to. And I went head on into wound and darkness in a way that was quite brutal to myself. Like I expected of myself to go there and see the truth of things, of my own past and all of these things. And that can be, like, it's almost like, oh, if it's not painful, it's not real, which is actually a symptom of the trauma itself, that kind of definition of the healing journey. And then some of us are overemphasizing the light. Yeah, we don't want to go to the dark, so we want to just kind of think positive, and we just want to like feel good, which then results in this kind of uprootedness and separation. So what is beautiful about the goddess map and trauma healing map is that it is fluid, in the sense that there's not an either or. It's something that transcends that binary, and that is what we call resource. It is not like a light you have to make up. It's not an overindulgence in the dark. It is simply to pay attention to what is here. Presence is the magic key. Presence is like a space, like a room without walls. It's an alive intelligence right now here, available to all of us. And in one way, the suffering we experience is to the degree of separation we feel from our own presence. Because in presence, we actually have a lot of space for the different contractions in our bodies and reactivities in the body that are, natural consequences of trauma. Yeah. Because even the judging of those reactivities is part of the trauma. It's part of the kind of internalized abusive energy. So to begin to when we call embodiment is also to find that anchor in something that is always here in the present moment, which can hold reactive patterns from the past, which can, hold these loops. We have a place to come back to. We have a place to anchor ourselves. So we spend a lot of time with that, with the grounding, with the awareness in the body. But then we begin to discover that the body is a portal into an intelligence that wants to heal, that wants to balance, wants to regulate. That's what it does best. It's like it's an expert in it. Yeah. So our job is somehow to get out of the way. And how we get into the way is often what we call trauma. It's like it's not voluntarily. Yeah, it's like these contractions that were intelligent responses in a certain moment that has become frozen. So it's not intelligent response at this moment, but many of us experience that it just happens unconsciously.
Yeah.
So presence is the magic key in our work.
And I think what you're also pointing to is accessing the potential for, like you said, a room without walls. But it's through here. It's not somewhere up here and out there or in a book. It's just right here already. And as you put your hand up on yourself, that like we can access that. So I think that is so powerful, because a lot of time when people are experiencing that depths of despair, they think it's going to be so much work to get to the other side. Like it's going to be a journey that's going to be so hard, I might as well not try. But I think the hope is in that all it is this one breath too. Right?
Yeah.
You were speaking earlier of the vagus nerve and how your practices can embody the embodiment of the practice that you teach can help in regulation. That's something that I know that you offer. Can you speak to that meditation that you have?
Yes, it's one of my favorite meditations. I use it every day, especially now in this time and age when we have gone through, the pandemic and the racial, the call for racial justice. There's a lot of collective trauma healing that is happening. Yeah, a lot of exiled parts that is coming out of the underworld and really wants, to be part of wholeness. And that's the challenging, confronting work that we are in. And so many of us experience a sense of groundlessness. There's a sense of urgency, there's a sense of threat, but there's no immediate resolution. So the body mobilizes stress hormones, adrenaline. For those who have some trauma wounds, this is, intensified even more. So more than ever, it is important to establish some reliable things you can do to yourself to regulate the nervous system. Because a lot of the thoughts and perceived urgency are actually just, they are results of a kind of a cocktail. We're actually drunk, yeah, on these stress hormones. So that influences how we think and perceive things. So for me, I have not been experiencing much of anxiety in my life. That has not been my main emotional response. I'm a fight. I go into fight right away. But going through menopause and the hormone changes in that, and plus this whole last year, it has been so much going on. I have had taste of this kind of anxiety cocktail. And what has helped me is our practices. I mean, we have many practices that has to do with grounding to come into the body. You mentioned when we talked before about the garden. The garden is really, really helping me to ground. One of the practices that I use every day is a breathing practice. And it is a slow, long you take long, slow, you take long, slow breaths while touching different areas of the body. So you guide it through. So first you have your lower belly, or like all the way down to your hip bones, navel, solar plexus, chest, collarbone, and then back of the skull, and then forehead or the head, top of the head, and then we actually go up also, just to begin to fill the area around our bodies with our presence. And it's very soothing for the vagus nerve. I go through it very fast now because I want to share with you the recording of this so that everybody can have a real experience of it, because it takes a little, the experience of it is very slow and deep. So now I just went through it. And I'm excited to share that with, because it has helped a lot. And also I love the herbal allies. Like herbs are really, really, really helping me stabilize and regulate. And also the Abhyanga, the Ayurvedic practice of massaging warm oil into the body. That is something I do in the evenings when I feel frazzled. And it is very, very calming and grounding. And that is for me when you have anxiety or fight response. But of course, if your response is freeze, which is for many of us, then there are different practices. I mean, this always helps, but we emphasize also practices like dance or stretching or movement that can help, soften that freeze response.
Beautiful. Well, the link to the meditation that Chameli was just mentioning will be available on this page, as well as if you go back and look in the messages, you'll find all the links to that practice, as well as just a vault and a treasure trove of practices in Awakening Women, which is on the website, and a very vibrant community that Chameli has started. It's almost been over 10 years now. Am I right?
It's actually much longer than that. We were practicing much longer. We were before we went online. So this is, I will say, maybe 17 years.
17 years. Beautiful. So any other words of encouragement, or what is a message that wants to be expressed through you in this moment for our audience?
Well, I would say that, again, it's another reframe, but the way I also want to define trauma, or those who have a trauma response, is that it is a sign of health. It's a sign of sensitivity, and it's a sign of an intelligence in the body that is able to protect against trauma. So trauma response is a sign of health, although it can feel as a restriction and a disease later on in life when it kind of has that involuntarily activation. But if we look at the response as an enemy, we are again into that kind of pushing away, that battle that actually is what creates trauma in the first place. So one thing helped me a lot is to see that these responses is like, I see them as goddesses just sitting, protecting the gate, and like they have protected me, even though maybe that has hindered intimacy, or but they have a purpose. And instead of me kind of, when I start to feel that more longing for aliveness, there's that impatience that I want them to go away. Like, go away, I want to be free. But that's a little bit disrespectful. So I have learned to kind of give offerings to these guys and say, thank you so much for protecting me. You probably saved my life at one point where you made me freeze and leave my body. That was actually a good thing in that situation. And thank you so much. My consciousness has grown more now. I am ready to go in there. So please let me in. You can relax the cards. So it's have to have a friendship with these responses has helped me a lot.
Oh, thank you. That's a very powerful reframe, and I'm looking forward to continuing this conversation with you, and having more of these, because this is such a timely topic today, and it has been needed for a long time. But now, the way we're experiencing this time on our planet, it's kind of left us with no choice but to really go there, and go there by ourselves, but also knowing that we're not alone, and we're all in this shared experience. And like you said, collective consciousness, that we're awakening as well when we take responsibility for our own. So thank you for the invitation into the story, and to use that as a map for discovering what there is, um, the hope that there is, and all of it. Like you said, there's no good or bad. It's to be with the isness of it. So thank you so much. I know that the audience is, and I have sat side by side learning today, and really appreciate you being here on this Freedom from Trauma show. So I will see you again, and thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.